Hello, I'm Rebecca Flaherty, and today we're going to be continuing our beginner series and working on some more cute and cozy patterns. We're going to be making this sweet little knitted pattern here. If you're a regular here and you've seen some of these before, feel free to use the timestamps to skip to the beginning of the tutorial, but if you're new here, then welcome to the Pattern Makers Toolkit. You can get the free stamp brushes to make the motifs for this pattern over on my website, and I'm going to be showing you how to use the Pattern Maker canvas from my Etsy store to make patterns in Procreate using the diamond method. It's super easy and fun. It's going to speed up your workflow because sketching out and finalising the layout of the pattern first before you draw any motifs means that when you do come to illustrate motifs, you're only drawing the exact ones you need and you can draw them to fit their exact spot in the pattern. Traditionally, we tend to work the other way around when designing patterns, where we draw a bunch of motifs first and then try and piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle. But the problem with working that way in Procreate is that every time you rotate or scale a motif, the image quality deteriorates. So by doing it this way, you keep your image quality perfect, and you also get to preserve all the layers so you can always go back and easily make edits to the colours at a later date. It's also an especially good way to make patterns if you want to sell or license them, because you can export all these layers to something like Affinity Photo or Photoshop and be able to hand over a fully editable layered pattern to your buyer. And that is the workflow I use for all the patterns I make for commercial use. So that is why I love using the diamond method for making patterns in Procreate, and why I first created these canvas for myself to speed up my design process with all the layers set up like this to make the pattern. So we've got our pattern layer and our sketch layer in there, and also all the textures there on top. So let's get started and I'll explain how it all works as we go along. So when we bring PSD files into Procreate, we always want to start from a gallery screen, either in a stack like this or from the main screen like this. So we go to import and bring them in this way. If you bring them in via drag and drop by having two windows open, it flattens PSD files when you bring them in that way. So always bring in PSD layered files by going to import and then bringing them in this way. I'm going to use again the brightly painted canvas because that's what we've used for all these others. So we just tap on that and wait for that to download. And then these canvases have all the layers set up and are ready to use. You've got your overlay textures in here. So these include like some nice painty textures in there. And then you've got background textures on the bottom group here, which have got these nice little brush strokes in them. We are going to be working on in the sketch folder here on the draw here first layer. But first of all, I'm going to set the background color. So we'll choose this light colour for this one, and then we'll start working in this draw here first layer. So we'll go to our stamp brushes. This is a set that's free over on my website, and we're going to be using these knitting ones. There's these motifs here, and we've also got this knitted texture which will apply to them. So I'm going to start by grabbing each one of these, and on the draw here first layer, which is just an empty layer above this diamond, we're going to stamp each one of these on its own layer so that we can move them around and spread them around the pattern. So I'll put one of those, then we'll have a sock, and then on another layer we'll have a jumper or sweater depending on what part of the world you're in. I always call them jumpers. And a scarf. So each one of these is on a separate layer, so now we can duplicate and move them around and position them around the canvas. So let's start at the top with our jumper, and we'll turn off snapping and magnetics for this. And we'll put that up there. And then we will duplicate these and flip them around to fill up the space down here as well. So let's start with another ball of wool, and it's nice to flip them the other way so you've got some interest of it, the same motif repeated but looking slightly different, and that helps to build out a nicer pattern. And the jumper's symmetrical, so you don't need to flip that one over. Just rotate it. Right, we'll try that for size. So we'll pinch all of these together and then pinch them down with the sketch diamond. And then we duplicate this, tap on transform, put snapping and magnetics back on, and then we can snap this into each of the corners until we see those orange lines intersecting there. And we can also zoom in, and because this is the pattern maker canvas, you'll see these line up exactly to verify that is definitely in the right place. We snap that over to here, duplicate and snap one into this corner, and then one down there. Then the top four we pinch and merge together, and we can invert the colours on those so that we can see what is on our kind of working layer and what's going to be duplicated. And when we come to illustrate this, the only motifs that we need to draw are just these ones in pink. So I think the spacing on this is probably kind of okay. I probably might just move this scarf down a bit. So I'm using the freehand select tool, and we'll just move that to there. And then because I've moved that, that means this one is no longer in the right place. So we can duplicate the pink layer, put snapping and magnetics back on again. Let's bring this down here, and we can go up to the green layer. We could just erase that one there rather than putting it around all four corners. We'll just fix this one and invert that scarf, and then we can merge it with the rest of the green. And then to fill in the gaps so that this matches with all the other patterns in this series, I'm going to add some flowers in here. So I'll grab my flower brush, and I think I also want to put one here that will go off the corners, so like there, but obviously I need it to be able to line up with that side. So the way we work on the corners with this, I'm gonna duplicate what we've got around the corners for now, the same as we did. So we'll duplicate and snap this into each of the corners, pinch those pink ones together, delete this green one because we don't need that, I'll invert the colours on this one, and then we're going to duplicate this green layer, tap transform, and we're going to snap it halfway over this side here. Then that one will snap over to this side, and if I pinch those together, you'll see in the middle when I zoom in, we don't have a diamond anymore, we've got an X, and you can use this to check that it's centered. And then we do the same with the pink layer. So duplicate, drag half of it over here, and then drag the other half over there. And then we've brought the edges into the middle, so instead of a diamond we now have an X. And then on this pink layer we can just put a flower down in there like that. And then we have to put it back where it was, so we can delete the green layer, duplicate this pink one, put it back over this side, and the bottom one back over this side. Zoom in down here. That should all still be nice and straight if you've snapped it properly. Pinch those together, and then we just repeat the offsetting these around the edges like that. Then we can pinch the top four together, invert the colours, and then the very last thing to do is just to add the smiley faces to these. So add a layer above your pink, grab your smiley face brush, and then we're going to apply these over the motifs here. Make them slightly smaller for the scarf, make it even smaller again for the socks, and I just realised that I did this one on the wrong sock. It kind of doesn't matter because we could draw it down there, but just to keep things simple I will put it on the pink one. So that is all the sketching done in our sketch folder. You can merge all the pink stuff down together, and the next thing to do now would be to start drawing this in the pattern folder. So I'm going to turn my pattern layer on, turn the opacity down on that, and we'll start drawing in this layer above the pattern marker. And I think I'll start with drawing the outlines for the sweaters. I use my tracing crayon for this, And I'm just going to trace over all this pink line work for the sweaters now. Then I'm going to add a layer and we'll draw the balls of wool next. I'm going to use this dark peach colour for that. So just draw around this and then hold to snap it to an ellipse shape, and then add these shapes in there as well. Then we can do the scarf. So I'll add another layer and do the outline for the scarf in this dark pink colour, which is the same colour as I used for that. So let's reduce the opacity on the sketch, and actually let's bring it up above the pattern and change the blend mode to linear burn. So back on this empty layer down here, we can draw the scarf in now. And we can add another layer for the socks. Next of all, we'll do the knitting needles. So I'm going to add a layer above the ball of wool, and we'll use this colour to do the needles. I'm just going to draw the tops of them on this layer and then add a layer underneath the balls of wool to draw the needles coming out underneath. So you want to draw these parts on a layer underneath, and then the top parts on the layer above. And then the bobbles on the end of the needles, you can do those on the same layer as the scarf because that's the same colour. Then we just need to draw the flowers. So then we can add a layer for the flower middles, and I'm going to draw those in this yellow colour. So draw, hold, and then tap to snap to your perfect circle if you want that to be a perfect circle. Or you could just draw and hold if you want it to be an ellipse, or if you are happy with it as wobbly as you've drawn it, you could just draw it and then leave it. And then this flower that goes off the edges, we'll draw that in a later section of the video in this extra folder there. So we'll leave that one for now. And we just need to draw the petals for the flowers in now. So underneath this layer that has these yellow circles on, we can add a layer, and I think I'll use this colour to do the outlines for these. There we go. Now all of our line work is done in this pattern folder, we can start filling in some of the colours. I'm going to hide these green ones so they're not distracting us colour-wise. And all of these layers that we've drawn here, I'm going to right swipe on all of those and group them. Then I'm going to duplicate that group and flatten it. If you don't have enough spare layers to duplicate all of that group, you could hide everything else except that group, swipe down with 3 fingers, copy all, then swipe down again and paste, and you'll get a copy of everything just like we've got here. So this layer here that we've just duplicated and flattened, I'm going to tap on that and I'm going to make it a reference layer. So everything we fill is going to use the line work on this layer for knowing what to fill inside. We can actually hide that and still use it. That's just there as a copy with all of these separate layers flattened onto one. But then we've still got each of the different colours on a different layer in this group if we want to go back. Turn this pattern marker off as well. And I can see that I forgot that, so I'll quickly go and fix that. There we go, all fixed. So now we can start filling these shapes in. So I'm going to be adding layers from the bottom up underneath the group. I'll just hide that reference layer again. And we'll start with the jumpers. So I'm going to use a light brown for those. And we can just fill those parts of the jumpers there. I'm going to add a layer and do the collars and cuffs a different colour. So I'm using the lightest yellow for those. I might actually go back and change the colour of the jumper so that it's a bit darker. So if I hide all the line work, you can see we've got this on a separate layer and it's just used the line work there as a guide, but then we still have all of those intact for changing the colours on those. And I'm going to change the colours on this, so I'll alpha lock that and I'll make it this darker orange colour. There we go. The next thing I'm going to do is add a layer for the balls of wool. So we use the light peach for that. Just fill all these little gaps in there. Then we could do the flowers, so add a layer and we can fill all those flowers in. Then we can add another layer and I'm going to fill the flower petals in with that light colour. We can do the socks on this layer too, because I'm going to have these toes and ankle bits white, and also these bits on the scarf I'm going to make white as well. We can add a layer and I'll do the pink bits on the scarf, and then last of all the socks. And that's all the colour filling done on here, so now we just need to draw in the faces. So we can add a layer on top and just trace over all of these little face circles. So we're going to trace over all of these like that for all of the shapes on this layer. When you do come to colour drop fill those, you need to remember to go to this layer and turn the reference off. Otherwise it's going to still fill using the same lines that are on that layer. Then we add a layer above to do the little white dots. Oh, I forgot this. That one there. Back to our layer above, get our creamy white colour and our mini dot brush. See what size we're at. And add the little dots in for the eyes. Then we can add another layer and do the little pink cheeks in there. And then there's one last step I want to do before we move on to the extra section, which is to add this special knitted texture. So now we get to add the fun knitted texture to these. So I'm going to grab my knitted texture brush and we'll start down here on these jumper layers. So if you grab a 50% grey colour, so double tap over here and you'll get a 50% grey. And then we need to alpha lock the layer that we're working on, and we're just going to scribble over the top, and you want to do it all in one pass, so don't kind of stop and then start again, because these will build up on top of each other. So you need to do it all in one go and just draw over the top of your jumper like that. And this is a directional brush, it's oriented to the canvas screen. So if we turn this so that kind of this is vertical, we can then draw these stitches at a slightly different angle like that. And then we could do the same with this one. You have to be careful to stay like this side of that line. Then we can go and do that to the other one, so we'll have this going up and down. So I'm going to go through and do this for all of the different knitted layers. So alpha lock all of these now and just start working our way up. So we'll do this one next. And you'll find that on lighter coloured layers, it doesn't show up as dark as on a darker colour to start with. If you do want it to come out a bit darker, you could try using a darker grey, like that. With the balls of wool, it kind of doesn't make sense to have those the same, but if you wanted it to be like that so that they matched, you could, but I'm not going to do those the same because it kind of doesn't make sense for that to have the knitted texture on it. So we'll go straight to the scarves next. And again, I'm going to have this that way up when I do this bit. You can always make the brush smaller if you want to be able to draw a bit more detail. It won't make the pattern any smaller as long as you don't move the screen, it will still line up, but just remember that you need to do the whole thing in one go. So I'll just undo that and do all of this in one go. So the downside with making the brush smaller is that it does take a bit longer, but you have more control about not going over the edges. So then we can turn this around this way and do this bit. There we go, so that's all the illustration done in our pattern group. Now it's time to move on to the extra folder. I'm going to put the sketch back on and I'm going to swipe down with 3 fingers and tap copy all. I'm going to turn on the extra group, tap on this extra marker here, swipe down with 3 fingers and paste. Then we can duplicate this with snapping and magnetics on, snap it over to this edge of the canvas. If you find that you're having difficulty getting yours to snap, it keeps hovering between 2 points, what you can do is just get rid of that one, turn off your pattern layer so that all you've got turned on is your extra folder. If you've got other layers turned on, Procreate is going to try and snap it to other layers. So if you've got something that ends just there, it will also try and snap it to that. So if I duplicate this again, that then snaps over there really easily. And then we can bring this one over there, pinch those two together, and then we need to add a layer above, and then we just draw in this flower the same way as we did with the others. Then I'm going to duplicate both of these layers, pinch these two middle ones together, and I'm going to use that as a reference layer for filling in underneath. And now that all of our illustrating is done, we're ready to start building out the pattern tile. So first of all, I'm going to duplicate my extra group. If you don't have enough layers spare to duplicate the whole thing, you can turn off everything except your extra group, and then hide the inserted image and the extra marker. Turn off the background layer as well, so you just have this on show. Swipe down with 3 fingers, copy all, and then swipe down again and paste. So now you've got a flattened copy of that. We can now turn off the extra layer. I'm going to turn on my pattern folder, and I am going to duplicate this one and flatten this. But again, if you didn't have enough layers, you could duplicate that the same way we did with this one. So I'm going to bring that one at the top, hide all of those layers, and I'll turn the background colour back on now. So first of all, we want to put this flower back on the edges where it's meant to be. So on this layer, we make a mark going off the edges of the opposite corners, duplicate the layer, tap transform and snap it over to this edge, and snap the other one over to this edge, and then that is back in its position on the edge of the canvas now, but we still have the layered version of it underneath. You can pinch those together and erase those. Then we can turn the pattern on, take the alpha lock off, merge those two together, and then we need to put another mark going off with the pen, not the eraser, going off the edge of those. Then we're going to duplicate this and put it into the corners the same way as we did when we were working with the sketch. So duplicate, tap transform, and snap it into the corners here. This time be so careful that you've got those orange lines intersecting, because this is for our final pattern, and if these bits don't line up, your pattern is going to have a little jog or a seam in it. So make sure these go all the way into the corners there. And again, if you find it difficult snapping, turn off all the layers apart from these two that we're working with. Once all those are in place, you can merge the top 4 together, erase that mark in the middle, and also erase it off the layer underneath. Then you can merge those two together. We can turn our background textures back on, and then our overlay textures, and that is our pattern tile ready to export. But before we do that, we need to check that this is repeating properly. So we're going to swipe down with 3 fingers and tap copy all. Then we're going to come up to the top here, and we're going to swipe down again and tap paste. And now we've got a flattened copy of everything there. And underneath, we can add a layer and just fill it with a dark colour. And by putting that dark layer underneath, if there's any gaps in the pattern, that dark colour will show through. Whereas if we left it like this, it would be a similar kind of colour showing through, so it wouldn't necessarily show up. So that's why we put a contrasting colour underneath. So on this top layer, tap transform, and we're going to snap it up to the middle of the canvas. Width and height should be 1800 pixels. Then we're going to duplicate and snap it into this corner. And then we can zoom in and check that everything along this seam, check that our motifs are lined up and that there's not any black line going down there. If those look okay, you can merge those together, duplicate that, drag it down to the bottom, and then we can check this seam that's going across the middle, make sure that there's no motifs not lined up, and again that we don't have a black line there. That's looking okay, so we can merge those together, and that is our pattern in repeat. I really hope you've enjoyed watching this tutorial and that you're going to have a go at using this knitted texture in your own patterns. If you have a go at making this pattern or your own pattern with knitted textures in it and you share it on Cara, then don't forget to tag me at Becky Flaherty so I can see it. You can find the Pattern Maker canvas. The one we use today is the Boho Brights one, and you can find that over in my Etsy store, and the stamp brushes and palette that we used are free over in the Pattern Makers Toolkit. If you're a Pattern Makers Toolkit member, you get 10% off everything in my Etsy store. The Pattern Makers Toolkit is kind of like a Patreon group, except it's free. You get access to all the resources in the Pattern Makers Toolkit on my website, including those I make for my Skillshare classes, early access to some of my YouTube tutorials and drawing prompts, discounts in my Etsy store, and one new freebie exclusively via email every month. And I only send out one email per month, I promise. If you want to see more pattern tutorials like this every week, then don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube. Have fun, stay creative, and I will see you next time.